Hello there. Tonight we are going to travel back in time not just a few decades or centuries, but several millennia to ancient Egypt, where the Nile flows eternal and the gods are always watching. But before we step into the sandals of a common Egyptian picture, you're lying on a straw mat in a sun-baked mud brick hut, and it's not even sunrise yet. The roof is made of woven reeds, and somewhere outside a frog croaks already regretting its life decisions. The air is still, except for the occasional whimper of wind sliding sand under your door. And then bam! The sun rises. It doesn't rise gently like a golden whisper over the horizon. No, in ancient Egypt it launches into the sky like it's got somewhere to be punching through your makeshift ceiling with heat that feels personal. You don't have curtains. You don't even have a window really, just a rectangular hole that lets in light, bugs, and sand in equal measure. The sun pours through like liquid flame, and suddenly your body is sweating through your linen sheet, which by the way is barely thicker than a napkin at a bad diner. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You wake up itchy. Your mat is poking through your back, your face is stuck to your arm, and your hair, if you have any, is matted with sweat. There's a certain kind of heat that doesn't just sit on your skin but pushes into your bones, and Egypt's got it. Forget about morning dew or gentle breezes. You're living in a desert, remember. And this isn't the breezy Egypt the travel documentaries promised with cruise boats and swaying palm trees. This is the real deal, and your hut is one gust of wind away from becoming a bread oven. Now, if you were hoping for a little relief, maybe a nice cooling draft from the Nile, think again. That breeze died sometime during the First Dynasty and hasn't shown up for work since. Your only defense against the relentless heat. A tunic made of linen so thin it may as well be spiritual. The fabric clings to your skin instantly damp, doing absolutely nothing to stop the sun from roasting you like a holiday goose. And sunscreen. That concept won't exist for another few thousand years. No aloe vera, no SPF, not even a floppy hat with a beach bar logo. The ancient Egyptians did have protective oil, sure, but unless you're a temple priest or a member of the royal family, good luck getting any. You, dear listener, are more likely to end up slathering yourself in crocodile dung. That's not a joke. It was genuinely used as a sun protectant. Whether it worked or not is unclear. Historians still debate whether it had any medicinal value or just made people smell bad enough to keep the heat away. By mid-morning, the temperature is already hovering near 90 degrees over 32 degrees. And the stones outside your home are hot enough to cook lentils. You shuffle outside barefoot, wincing with each step as your feet scream in protest. Shade. What shade trees are a luxury reserved for the palace gardens? Your only hope is to hug the side of a mud brick wall that's radiating so much heat it feels like it's judging you. Everything around you is sweating: your house, your neighbors, your livestock, and definitely your soul. You try to wipe your forehead with your sleeve, but the fabric just smears the sweat around. It's like trying to dry your face with a sponge. And yet if you were to complain, don't expect sympathy. Remember, the sun isn't just weather in ancient Egypt, it's a god. Ra is watching, and if today is especially brutal, that just means Ra is feeling powerful. Congratulations. Your suffering is a compliment. You might think surely the people of ancient Egypt acclimated to this rite. Well, yes and no. Their bodies adjusted to the heat over time, but dehydration and heat stroke were still constant threats. Workers passed out in the fields, children grew up with sun-scorched skin, and people didn't live long. Most commoners died before they reached 35. So no, it wasn't easier. It was just normal. So here you are, sticky, stinky, squinting against the sun that seems more aggressive than necessary. Your body feels like a baked fig, and the day hasn't even truly begun. The mat you woke up on is still warm from your body, and not in a comforting way. Your breakfast isn't ready. Your job is waiting. And every part of your body is already silently begging you to go back to bed, which again is just that mat. There are no fans, no iced coffee, no escape. You've got errands to run, buckets to fill, and grain to grind. And the only thing standing between you and a total meltdown is your ability to endure like a sun-dried fig clinging to a reed wall in a heat wave. This is Egypt, baby. The land of God's pyramids and UV rays that could fry an ostrich egg on your back. And that's just your morning wake-up routine. You step out of your hut blinking into the molten brightness and instantly regret it. The heat hits you like a wall, thick and relentless, seeping into your tunic, your skin, your lungs. Every breath feels like inhaling through a damp wool scarf left too close to a bonfire. The ground beneath your feet is sizzling, the dust has turned to powder, and the very air buzzes with the invisible hum of insect sunstroke and survival. And yet there's no time to stand around wondering what you did in a past life to deserve this. You've got chores, and chore number one is basic hygiene, or whatever passes for it in this sun-scorched civilization. You trudge toward the Nile, the sacred river lifeblood of Egypt, provider of fish water and spiritual symbolism. But as you approach, you realize the stories have been embellished just a tad. The river doesn't glisten, it gurgles. It doesn't smell clean and fresh, it smells like a swampy fish market that's been kissed by a cow pasture. It reeks. You can smell it before you see it, a heady mix of rotting algae, wet feathers, and old gods. And let's not forget what else is down there. Frogs the size of loaves of bread, bugs with too many legs, ibis birds pecking around like nosy landlords, and of course the occasional crocodile minding its business. Until it isn't. You don't wade into the Nile so much as submit to it like you're entering the jaws of a sleepy but unpredictable deity. Soap doesn't exist, not the good kind anyway. If you're a temple worker, you might have access to natron salts or oils. If you're not, and you're probably not, your best bet is the sand. That's right, Egypt's most abundant resource is also your skincare routine. You grab a handful of it, wet your skin a little, and scrub. Welcome to exfoliation, Bronze Age style. It scratches, it chafes, and it leaves you wondering if your skin is coming off with the grime. Historians still debate whether this method was more about cleaning or ritual purification. Either way, it's uncomfortable and you have to do it regularly unless you want to be mistaken for a walking dust sculpture. Bathing is a public affair. Privacy is not a thing here. You're elbow to elbow with other villagers' livestock and the occasional goat that seems to enjoy wading ankle deep like it owns the place. Some people are washing themselves, others are doing laundry, and a few are probably dumping something upstream that you really don't want to think about. Your clothes, if you're lucky enough to own more than one set, get the same treatment. You drag them into the shallows, beat them against flat stones, and pray to whichever minor deity handles crocodile temperaments, that today is not the day your arm gets mistaken for a slow-moving fish. The Nile doesn't judge, but it does take what it wants. As you rinse off, you try to ignore the squelch of something unidentifiable sliding past your foot. You try not to think about parasites or leeches or worse, because thinking leads to fear, and fear makes you hesitate. Hesitating means standing still too long, and that means getting sunburned in places you really don't want to talk about. You finish bathing and head home dripping wet because there are no towels. You'll air dry on the walk. Everyone does. And by air dry, we mean become a moving salt lick for flies. They follow you buzz around, your head crawl on your shoulders, trying to see if you taste any different now that you've been rinsed like a side salad. At this point, it's still early, but you've already been smacked by the sun, bathed in dubious water, scrubbed yourself with sand, and dodged amphibians, and you're starving. So let's talk breakfast. Forget anything resembling a meal you'd find in a modern-day cafe. No fresh fruit platters, no yogurt parfaits, no avocado toast. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is purely utilitarian. It's a refueling operation, nothing more. You sit on a low stool, if you're lucky, or squat in the corner like everyone else. Your dining table is the floor, your plate is a hand-woven basket, and your cutlery is optimism. The main course, bread. lots of it. It's dense, coarse, and so packed with grit you could use it to polish silver. Egyptians used grinding stones to mill their grain, and tiny bits of stone often ended up in the flour. The result, a chewy slab that's part food, part mineral supplement. You don't eat it so much as battle it. Each bite wears down your teeth, and by your mid-20s your molars are already flat as coins. You wash it down with beer, but not the frothy, golden, chilled delight you might be picturing. No. This beer is thick room temperature and more like a drinkable loaf of bread. It's fermented just enough to be safe to drink, which is a polite way of saying it's vaguely sour, slightly chunky, and tastes like wet cereal that's gone off. But it's safer than the river, and even children drink it. Not because they're rebellious, but because it's the only way to avoid contracting something from the water that might make your insides boil. If you're lucky, and I mean really lucky, there might be a dried date or an onion to go with your sandy bread and beer gruel. Protein is a fantasy, unless someone caught a fish and didn't eat it immediately. Meat is rare, a luxury reserved for feast priests or royalty. Most days your stomach growls its way through life like a half-awake hippo looking for figs. And then there are the flies. They're not optional. They come with the meal like really persistent dinner guests. You wave them away with one hand while clutching your cup with the other, trying to chew sip and not inhale a bug all at once. Breakfast ends when the food runs out or the sun gets too high. Either way, it's time to get moving again. Your body, now fueled with a mixture of calories, warm yeast, and desperation, is ready to face whatever the day throws at you, which, spoiler alert, is probably going to be more heat, more dust, and more reasons to wonder why you were born during this exact period in human history. But hey, at least you've cleaned yourself, however questionably. You've eaten, sort of. You've survived the first hour of the day, and in ancient Egypt, that's already a win. Now all you have to do is work. Serve sweat, obey not die, and maybe if the gods are feeling generous, make it back to your straw mat tonight in one piece. And remember, the crocodiles are still watching, always. You've eaten your crunchy bread, choked down your chunky beer, and managed not to get eaten during your river bath. Congratulations, you're now ready for the day's real adventure labor. And not the clock in, clock out, sip coffee between emails kind. No, this is ancient Egyptian labor, the kind that makes modern burnout look like a spa retreat. Let's assume, generously, that you're not a royal scribe, a priest, or part of the merchant class. Because if you were, you wouldn't be sleeping on a straw mat or rubbing crocodile poop on your face. You'd have at least one servant, some actual oil to protect you from the sun, and a job that mostly involved sitting indoors. But you're a commoner. And that means your day's about to turn your bones into mush. If you're a farmer, and most people are, you've been up since before the first rooster even bothered to blink. Your job takes you directly to the fields along the Nile, ankle deep in thick black mud that squelches with each step. This isn't a gardening hobby. This is back-breaking survival. You're pulling weeds, planting seeds, or depending on the season, cutting down wheat with a curved sickle made of flint. It's a tool that gets dull fast and requires precision, unless you're trying to slice your own foot. Your tools are wooden, crude, and heavy. Your body is the machine. No oxen to pull the plow unless you're lucky or your village is relatively wealthy. Most days, it's you dragging a wooden rig through the muck while someone else pushes. This is not a cooperative activity, it's supervised. That means an overseer, typically with a stick, shouting, encouraging phrases like faster or do you want to eat this month. There's no lunch break. There's no shade. You're drinking tepid water from a clay jar and wiping your sweat with the back of your hand, which is already filthy. The flies have followed you from breakfast and now swarm around your ears, your eyes, your food, and anything that looks remotely like a moist surface. And if you're a construction worker, it gets even worse. Let's say the pharaoh has decreed the building of a new temple. Great news for the kingdom's spiritual future, not so great for your spinal column. Your role: hauling limestone, blocks some of them, weighing over 2 tons. These blocks are transported via a system of sledges and ramps, but don't let the system part fool you. it still involves dozens of men sweating through their linens and dragging the equivalent of an angry hippopotamus across hot sand. You work barefoot or with basic reed sandals so you feel every sharp rock, every burning step. Trip once and you're lucky to just get bruised. Twist an ankle, that's your week ruined. Break something, that might be your life ruined because there's no workers' comp, no hospital, and no sympathy. If you can't work, you don't eat. And if you can't eat, you become part of someone else's funeral offering before the month is out. And here's a fun little oddity. Historians still debate whether the massive projects like pyramids and temples were constructed entirely by forced labor, or if some workers volunteered during the Nile's flood season when fields couldn't be farmed. Either way, volunteer is a generous word when the alternative is getting kicked off your land or taxed into oblivion. Working inside tombs is a whole other flavor of misery. You're underground, chiseling out narrow corridors in limestone, creating passageways for someone else's eternal rest. The air is still dusty and heavy with the smell of sweat minerals and candle wax. You hammer away with primitive tools shaping walls that will be painted with stories you'll never read, built for kings you'll never see, filled with treasures you'll never touch. And oh yes, if you mess up, if you carve the wrong symbol or chip a sacred figure, that's not a mistake, that's sacrilege. You may find yourself buried right there in the tomb you just finished building, sealed in as an offering or a warning. Let's say, just for argument's sake, that you're not hauling blocks or digging tombs. Maybe you're a woman and you think, well, at least I won't be laboring in the sun. Right, wrong. Domestic labor in ancient Egypt is its own beast. You're grinding grain every single day by hand. You kneel on a stone slab with a smaller handstone and rub and rub and rub. It's not just exhausting, it destroys your knees, your wrists, and your back. You know how we said your molars wear down from gritty bread? Same thing happens to your joints. Once the grain's ready, you're fetching water from the Nile again, carrying it back in clay jars balanced on your head. Then comes weaving linen, sewing clothes, tending to livestock, preparing meals, nursing children, and still helping in the fields. Your day is a rotating wheel of muscle strain and time management, and your only break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes. And remember, there's no such thing as childcare. Your children go where you go. They play in the dust while you pound grain. They teethe on reeds while you sew. They get heat stroke while you try not to. Dinner is not much different from breakfast. More bread, more beer, maybe some lentils or onions if you're lucky. Maybe a fig if someone traded well in the market. You eat while working. There's no family meal around a table. There's no, how was your day conversation. Everyone knows how it was. You sweat, you hurt, you hope you make it to tomorrow. When the sun finally starts to dip, it's not a relief, it's a signal, a countdown. You've got to get home before full dark or risk stepping on something venomous, a snake, a scorpion, a bad-tempered rodent. You clean up again a splash of Nile water if there's any left in the jar. Then collapse onto your straw mat body, trembling from exertion, ears still ringing from the overseer's shouts. Hands scrape nails filled with dirt and back aching from bending and lifting all day. You don't get to lie there and decompress with a podcast or some soothing medieval sleep video. You lie there in silence, maybe interrupted by the occasional bray of a donkey, the whimper of a child, or the echoing chant from a temple 2 miles away where priests are still offering thanks to gods who never seem quite satisfied. And even when your eyes finally start to close, your brain doesn't, because you have to remember to wake early. There's no alarm clock. Your body is the alarm clock trained by pain and repetition. And in the back of your mind, you know if you don't meet your labor quota, there are consequences. Not like write-up in your HR file consequences. No. We're talking lashings, fines, reduced rations, or being assigned the worst jobs the next day like clearing dung or carrying buckets up temple stairs that go on forever. This is your life, every single day. And no, there's no weekend, no Saturday brunch, no Sunday market stroll. The only pause you get is during religious festivals, and even then, you're probably working as part of the ceremony, hauling offerings or scrubbing courtyards. Rest is a concept reserved for God's nobles and the deceased. So, before you envy ancient Egypt's art temples and poetic mythology, remember the people who built that legacy, one sunburned sand-covered step at a time. They didn't have careers, they had survival. So after a day of soul-sapping labor, whether in the fields, the tombs, or the smoldering courtyards of some noble's estate, you might feel the urge to vent. Maybe a little grumble under your breath like, "This job stinks." Or, "Why is my entire life just sweat and grain dust?" But let me stop you right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous. See, your boss isn't just a boss. The pharaoh, the person at the very top of this sand and suffering pyramid scheme, isn't merely a ruler. He's a god, like literally. He's the human embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed deity of kingship and the sky. He's also the son of Ra, the sun god, the one you already baked under this morning. It's all connected cosmically, hierarchically, inescapably. The pharaoh doesn't just wield power. He is power. His image is painted on the walls of temples larger than everyone else in the scene, even the gods sometimes. His name is etched into statues, columns, coin molds, and even stamped onto bricks. You might be a human being, but next to him, you are closer to being a breadcrumb, possibly the burnt edge of one. So when you complain about your job, or mention that maybe it's a little unfair that you've been carrying rocks since sunrise, you're not just criticizing management, you're blaspheming against divine order. Literally. In Egypt, the concept of mater governs all. That's the divine principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. The pharaoh is its guardian, and any disruption, verbal, emotional, or social, is seen as a threat to the entire system. And threats to the system, they get punished. Punishment in ancient Egypt is not about reforming your behavior. It's about making a statement. Get caught insulting the pharaoh, and you might find yourself publicly flogged. If you're unlucky, shackled. Really unlucky, your journey to the afterlife might be starting early and without your favorite funerary goods. There's no First Amendment here. Freedom of speech is not a thing. Even whispering the wrong thing near a temple can result in consequences that involve chains, hot iron, or being forced to clean crocodile pens with your bare hands. Most people, of course, don't risk it. They've grown up with the belief that the pharaoh is divine, that he alone ensures the Nile floods on time crops grow, enemies stay away, and your sick child has a fighting chance at survival. It's not just politics, it's the weather, your food supply, your health, and your chance at an afterlife all rolled into one deity wrapped in human skin. You don't just obey the pharaoh, you revere him. But here's where things get extra spooky. Most citizens of ancient Egypt never even see the pharaoh, not once. The closest they get is during religious festivals when the golden bark, a kind of divine boat, is paraded through the streets by priests. The pharaoh may or may not be inside. He's hidden behind veils and incense smoke, surrounded by guards and nobles. Blink, and he's gone. He lives behind palace walls you'll never step inside, eats food you can't even pronounce, and prays in temples whose gates are locked to commoners. And yet, his image is everywhere, staring down from every wall, every scroll, every clay pot and marketplace carving. It's all very Big Brother meets Divine Monarch meets. Historians still debate just how divine the pharaoh was believed to be in practical terms. Was he seen as a literal god by everyone, or just treated like one out of convenience? Either way, belief or not, the consequences of doubt were real. Nobody was going to test the limits of tolerance. So what do you do instead of complaining? You perform devotion. You repeat the official lines. Praise Pharaoh, the bringer of Ma'at. May his reign be long and the Nile bountiful. Even when your sandals are melting into your feet and your tunic is stiff with sweat and your last full meal was 3 days ago. Especially. Then you keep up the praise because it's safer. And if you're really fortunate, you might find yourself working on one of the royal projects, like a tomb, a temple, or a massive statue made to honor the king's latest victory. You don't get to say no, refusing divine service. That's a one-way ticket to public humiliation. So you show up, hammer in hand, back aching eyes bleary from lack of sleep, and you smile. Because what else can you do? You tell yourself it's an honor. You say the words, you carve the symbols, you chant the prayers over and over. Great is Pharaoh, mighty is his breath, merciful is his rule. Whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. It's repetition that keeps you alive. And don't even think about rebellion. Pharaohs weren't soft. They crushed uprisings faster than a desert scorpion disappears into the sand. If your village so much as hesitates to deliver grain taxes, it's gone. Soldiers arrive. Families disappear. And then the whole area is purified in the name of the gods. That's a euphemism. It doesn't mean blessed with incense and good vibes. It means burnings. It means beatings. It means you don't talk about that village anymore. You probably know stories half-whispered, legends about past pharaohs who ruled with terrifying grandeur, like Akhenaten, who tried to change the entire religion of Egypt and got so unpopular that later generations chiseled his name off monuments. Or Ramses, whose statues are the size of mountains and who had so many children he needed a spreadsheet just to remember their names. And of course, there are the unnamed ones, the pharaohs whose tombs were looted, whose souls were forgotten, whose stories were deliberately erased. Because in Egypt, the worst punishment isn't death, it's being forgotten. That's why names are written so prominently in temples. Hieroglyphs weren't just writing, they were spiritual anchors. To remove a name was to sever a soul from the afterlife. So if you get caught mocking the pharaoh, don't be surprised if your name gets scraped off every record, every stone, every tablet. It's like cancel culture, but eternal and with actual crocodiles. And still somehow the belief system works. Even after a day of pain, of hunger, of heat so thick you could drink it, people gather at dusk and chant together. They bow toward the temples, make offerings, speak words in a language so old it might as well be the breath of the earth itself. Because this is Egypt. This is your world. And it's not just about surviving, it's about participating in something eternal. You don't exist for comfort. You exist for continuity, for order, for mat. So you keep your head down. You do the work. You say the words. You avoid the wrath of temple guards, of neighbors who might tattle, of gods who might be watching. You don't question the system, because the system is older than sand, older than time, and you're just passing through it, one blistered footstep at a time. Because in ancient Egypt, silence isn't just golden, it's divine protection. And bedtime prayers aren't optional, they're survival. So you've made it through a day of back-breaking labor, kept your mouth shut about the pharaoh, and survived the swampy morning bath. You've done everything right. And yet you can't shake one small but insistent realization you are never ever going to escape the sand. It's everywhere. You wake up, it's in your nose. You eat, and there it is crunching between your molars, like a reminder from the gods that flavor is a modern privilege. You blink and your eyes feel like someone's taken a tiny sandstone rake to your corneas. And no matter how tightly you wrap your linen tunic, that gritty golden dust finds its way under, around, and through. Sand is not just an environmental feature, it's your closest companion, your co-worker, your seasoning, and your enemy. The ancient Egyptians lived in an arid desert climate, and while the Nile's flooding created fertile soil along the riverbanks, the rest of the landscape was dry, vast, and absolutely relentless. The wind kicks up like a moody house cat suddenly aggressively, and with no warning. You can be walking home from the fields, minding your own sunburned business, when a gust blasts through the alley like the breath of a sand demon, and boom! You're coughing, squinting, and wondering how the sky turned the color of toast crumbs. And here's the kicker. Your clothes offer zero protection. You wear linen because that's all anyone has, unless you're rich enough to afford imported fabrics, and you're not. Linen is breathable light and surprisingly fashionable in its simplicity. But it's also thin. Really thin. Think whisper of a curtain in a sauna. It clings when it's hot, which is always, and it does absolutely nothing to keep the sand out. You might as well wear a fishnet. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptians had designated workwear and leisure wear, or if it was more like you wear the least ragged thing you have and call it a day. Either way, your outfit is no match for your environment. Sand seeps down your collar, sneaks under your waistband, and settles into creases you didn't even know your body had. It doesn't matter how well you tuck or tie, sand finds a way. Your shoes, if you even have any, are a joke. Most people go barefoot. The lucky ones wear sandals made of braided reeds or leather, but let's be real, those things are decorative at best. They flap, they break, they slide off. And more importantly, they don't stop the heat. The sun bakes the ground until it's hot enough to fry dates, and every step feels like walking on a griddle covered in thumbtacks. And then come the sandstorms. Egypt doesn't do gentle weather. When it's windy, it's windy. One moment you're at the market chatting with your neighbor about goat prices. The next, the sky turns yellow. The air thickens and people start wrapping cloth over their mouths, ducking behind carts and cursing the gods in mutters they hope won't be overheard by any lurking spirits. The wind screams. Visibility drops. Sand flies into your ears, your mouth, your soul. The storm might last minutes, might last hours. You hunker down and wait. Afterward, everything is coated in a fine, gritty layer, your food, your bedding, your hair, your teeth. You spit and it crunches. You drink and it sinks. You go to bed and you feel it scraping at your legs like an overzealous exfoliating glove. And don't think the indoors will save you. Your home is made of mud brick practical, yes, but not exactly sealed. The windows are just holes in the wall. There's no glass, no screens, no doors that seal, just a curtain or a wooden panel if you're lucky. So every breeze that blows brings in a bit more sand like a gift that keeps on giving. Your bed, not better. It's a straw mat sometimes raised on a wooden frame if you're fancy, but straw is like a sponge for sand. Every night you lie down and shift just enough to remind yourself that yes, your back is now a landscape of abrasions and resentment. You try to shake the sand off before lying down, but it's futile. By morning it'll be back, and your food's still sandy. Bread is a staple, coarse, dense, made from emmer wheat or barley. The grain is ground using stone querns, and those stones shed tiny flakes of grit into the flour. Every bite comes with a hint of rock. You chew and feel your molars slowly surrendering to erosion. Archaeologists have found ancient Egyptian skulls with teeth so worn down they look like someone tried to sand them into pebbles. That's not just age that's breakfast. Even your cooking pots aren't safe. Clay jars and dishes are open-mouthed invitations to the elements. You cover them as best you can, but sans lips in between, the crack settles in your lentils and spices your onions with a little extra crunch. You start to wonder if your stomach lining is slowly turning into sandstone. And yet somehow life continues. People adapt. You learn to filter water through linen to get the biggest sand particles out. You eat with your fingers because utensils just collect dust. You wrap your face in fabric when you walk, blink constantly, and drink beer not just for hydration but to wash down the dust. You oil your skin with whatever you can find, animal fat if you're lucky, leftover sesame oil if you're wealthy, or crushed herbs mixed with river water if you're creative. The oil forms a sort of barrier against the sand, though it also attracts more flies, which is just perfect. And for the eyes, there's kohl. Yes, that iconic black eyeliner isn't just a fashion statement, it's functional. Made from ground galena lead sulfide or soot, kohl helps reduce sun glare and supposedly offers protection against infections. You smear it around your eyelids with a stick and hope it helps with the sand, the heat, the spiritual energy, and your general sense of being slowly ground into a fine powder. You don't fight the sand. You just live with it. You learn to walk with your eyes half closed, breathe through your sleeve, and shake out your bedding each night like you're trying to evict invisible insects. You get used to the feeling of grit under your fingernails and between your toes. You accept that your ears will never be clean and that your skin will always feel like it's wrapped in burlap. And you tell yourself, maybe it's not all bad. Maybe the sand is sacred. Maybe this endless exfoliation is the God's way of polishing you into something better. Or maybe it's just sand, and it's winning. But either way, you go to sleep with the grainy rasp of linen against your arms, your jawbone sore from chewing stone bread, and a little pile of dust building up in the corner of your home like it's trying to start a union. You close your eyes, and in your dreams, it's still there, whispering through the cracks, brushing your cheeks, waiting to greet you in the morning. Because in ancient Egypt, sand isn't just part of the landscape. It is the landscape. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is brutal, but at least I'm the boss of my life, right? I choose when to eat, sleep, work, maybe even say a little prayer before bed. Not quite. Because in ancient Egypt, your entire day, every moment from sunrise to sundown, is shaped not by personal preference or even survival instinct, but by the complex, ever-present demands of the gods. Think of it as living under a full-time spiritual performance review. Your boss, a divine cast of characters with animal heads, obscure symbols, and very specific expectations. Religion here isn't something you dabble in once a week. It's not a passive light a candle and go kind of arrangement. It's the operating system of your existence. Your job, your health, your meals, your hygiene, your bedtime, every single activity is a part of an elaborate dance designed to keep the universe from unraveling. It's like living in a play where the script was written by crocodiles and moon spirits and you didn't get a rehearsal. Start with your wake-up routine. You don't just stretch and yawn and roll out of bed. No, the proper response to seeing the sunrise is gratitude. Ra, the sun god, has successfully navigated the underworld through the night and re-emerged. That means the cosmos still works, and you're not dead. Hooray. Better thank him immediately or risk cosmic imbalance. It doesn't matter how stiff your back is or how much sand is in your nose, you look to the east and murmur your thanks. And let's say you spill some beer while getting ready. That's not just clumsy. That's an offense to Hathor, goddess of joy, beauty, and yes, beer. You better offer a prayer before she turns your bad luck into a lifestyle. Now, stub your toe on a clay jar. Don't curse out loud. That might attract a spirit, one with a grudge. Ancient Egyptians believed in countless supernatural beings, some helpful, some malicious, many extremely moody. You stub your toe, mutter something inappropriate, and suddenly you've got a minor household demon squatting on your thatch roof. Better to say a quick apology, maybe offer a crumb of bread and pretend it didn't happen. And this, my dear listener, continues all day long. Before meals, you thank the gods for the harvest. After meals, you might leave an offering, a sip of beer, a scrap of bread, especially if you want the next meal to happen. Before bed, you pray that Set, the god of chaos, doesn't throw your dreams into existential chaos or toss your house into spiritual disarray. Even funerals weren't just emotional farewells. They were multi-day cosmic dramas. The dead had to navigate the underworld with all the finesse of a diplomat carrying a briefcase full of spells. And you as the living had to help them get there with the right rituals, the right prayers, and ideally the right amulets. Forget to do it properly, and Grandma might get eaten by a death monster with the head of a crocodile and the legs of pure nightmare fuel. And speaking of that afterlife, the Egyptians didn't believe that life ended when you died. Nope. That's when the real test begins. You have to go through the Hall of Mat or Afde, where 42 gods ask you to deny a laundry list of sins. I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not covet my neighbor's donkey. You have to pass each one convincingly. Then your heart is placed on a scale balanced against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and justice. If your heart is heavier than the feather, that means you've been naughty. And you don't go to jail or get fined. You get eaten by a mitmoestal, a beast that's 1/3 lion, 1/3 crocodile, and 1/3 hippo, the trifecta of no thank you. Your soul is erased forever, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is worse than anything imaginable. It's not just death, it's non-existence. If you pass, you get to hang out in the field of reeds. It's like the perfect version of Egypt, fertile, peaceful, and miraculously sand-free. There are boats, crops, family gatherings, eternal food. You even get to nap for eternity. It's the dream, but only if you followed every ritual to the letter. That's why even the poorest people scraped together what they could to buy charms, spells, and little figurines for their tombs. These weren't decorations, they were spiritual tools. A spell to ward off snakes, a chant to make your heart behave during judgment, a tiny statue called a shapti to do your afterlife chores for you. Think of them as cosmic interns, eternally unpaid. And while we're at it, don't forget the gods themselves. There were a lot of them. Egypt had more deities than a soap opera has characters. There's Ra, the sun god, Osiris, ruler of the underworld, Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom who invented writing, Bastet, the cat goddess who handles protection, fertility, and ancient Instagram aesthetics. Then there's Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile, because if you're going to live next to a river filled with toothy nightmares, you might as well give one of them divine status. Some gods were popular across the kingdom, others were local deities worshipped only in one town or village, and all of them expected offering ceremonies and attention. You might have a shrine in your home. You light incense, pour water into a basin, whisper prayers. Your walls might be painted with protective symbols. Your neck might hold an amulet. Your work tools might be marked with symbols to ward off evil. Even your food might be blessed. The temple system was massive. Priests weren't just religious figures, they were administrators, scientists, doctors, and political insiders. Temple complexes owned land, collected taxes, and employed workers. Offerings flowed in daily grain, wine, bread, and more. The gods weren't short on snacks. And for you, as a regular person, the temple might be the one place where your life intersects with the divine in any official capacity. You might witness a procession, attend a festival, or get healed by a priest-doctor who knows which chant cures headaches and which potion keeps spirits out of your water jar. This daily choreography of belief ritual and divine obligation was exhausting. But it wasn't seen as burdensome, it was normal. It gave structure to chaos. It was how the world made sense. Historians still debate just how much of this was truly believed by the average Egyptian, and how much was social glue, tradition, or habit. But what's clear is that for thousands of years, the system endured. People woke, prayed, worked, blessed, died, and repeated over generations because they believed in Ma'at, the cosmic order. So you'd better memorize your prayers. Learn which god likes what offering. Avoid saying cursed words. Don't spill oil on sacred ground. Don't walk into a temple without cleansing yourself. Don't eat food offered to the wrong deity. And definitely don't forget to thank Ra for sunrise every single morning. Because in ancient Egypt, even brushing your teeth if you had any left was part of a ritual. And the gods are always watching, even the crocodile ones. You've made it. Through the ritual said your prayers bowed to the gods and survived another sunburned, sandblasted day. But what if, despite all that effort, your body decides to betray you? What if your stomach churns, your head throbs, or you step on something sharp and feel a heat in your foot that doesn't come from Ra? Time for a trip to the doctor. Now let's be clear. Ancient Egyptian medicine wasn't a total disaster. In fact, by ancient standards, it was pretty advanced. They had surgical tools, scrolls filled with medical knowledge, and an understanding of anatomy that was surprisingly detailed. And this is a rather large, but medicine here was never just science. It was magic. Always magic. Because in Egypt, if you were sick, it wasn't necessarily because you caught a bug. It might be because a ghost was mad at you, or a demon curled around your spleen, or you offended a god by sneezing without permission. So your first stop isn't a sterile clinic. It's a temple. You're guided past columns carved with lotus flowers and stories of divine healing. Inside, it smells of incense and honey. A priest/doctor in a linen robe greets you not with a stethoscope, but with a prayer. Let's say your problem is a headache. The remedy. It might be a paste of crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while the priest softly recites a protective hymn to Thoth. Still hurting, time to escalate. Next step, cow dung mixed with dates smeared on your chest. Not joking. And while that pace settles in, the healer chants another spell just to be sure the ache isn't caused by a cursed gaze from your neighbor's envious wife. If your eye is infected, lizard blood and ochre stirred with beer and applied directly to the eyelid. All accompanied by a prayer to Horus, who famously lost an eye once and got it back so clearly he's the go-to ophthalmologist among the gods. And what if you've got a wound? Let's hope it's not too deep, because anesthesia doesn't exist. If your leg is cut open or an abscess needs draining, the procedure involves sharp flint tools, a few helpers to hold you down, and a mud brick to bite. Stitches are done with linen thread. Cleanliness. It depends on the river being less polluted than usual, and whether your healer remembered to wash their hands, which, spoiler, they probably didn't. Still, some treatments actually worked, kind of. Honey was commonly used on wounds. Turns out it's naturally antibacterial. Moldy bread was applied to infections, which, yes, sounds disgusting, but also contains penicillin-like properties. They didn't know the science, but they figured out the effect. Call it divine inspiration or accidental innovation. Either way, it sometimes helped. For internal problems, there were dozens of potions made from herbs, minerals, and things you probably wouldn't want anywhere near your digestive system. Crushed beetles, pulverized donkey's teeth, goose fat. And if those didn't work, you could always blame a snake spirit and request an exorcism. Female health. A whole separate category of hopeful horror. Pregnancy tests involved urinating on wheat and barley. If either grain sprouted, congratulations, you were with child. Historians have actually tested this, and bizarrely, it works about 70% of the time. Labor, however, was a terrifying ordeal. No painkillers, no sterile rooms, just a hot chamber, maybe a midwife if one's available, and lots of prayers to Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, to keep death at bay. And if the baby survived, which was never guaranteed, you'd wrap it in linen, anoint it with oil, and protect it with a string of charms beads, little amulets, and maybe even a tiny figurine shaped like Bez, the dwarf god of protection, who looked like he was permanently in mid-dance-off with evil. But let's not get too optimistic, because if you got really sick, there wasn't much anyone could do. Fever. Hope it breaks. Tooth infection. Welcome to slow agony. Ancient Egyptian teeth were famously bad thanks to all that sand in the bread and gritty flour. Molars wore down into stumps by your 20s. Cavities turned into abscesses, and if they became infected, you either lived with it, died from it, or had it yanked out with what basically amounted to blacksmith tools. No numbing, just a prayer, a friend to hold your arms, and a lot of screaming. And then there were the charms. For every illness, there was an amulet. A little carved eye for protection, a frog for fertility, a scarab for rebirth. You wore them around your neck, pinned them to your tunic, placed them under your pillow, or buried them in jars under your floor. If one didn't work, you added another. It wasn't about logic, it was about coverage. If you're wondering how this all fits into daily life, the answer is seamlessly. Illness wasn't separate from religion. It wasn't even treated as a punishment. It was a message. The gods were trying to tell you something. Maybe that you needed to purify your spirit. Maybe that you made a bad offering. Maybe that your neighbor's cat was more spiritually important than yours, and you should rethink your priorities. So getting medical help wasn't just about treating the body, it was about realigning your soul. Even your dreams were the medical data. If you dreamt of falling teeth, that could mean your family was in danger. If you dreamt of drowning emotional imbalance. If you dreamt of being chased by a crocodile. Well, honestly, they probably just meant you live too close to the Nile and should stop bathing at dusk. Ancient Egyptian physicians were part scientist, part priest, part therapist. They wrote scrolls cataloging symptoms, remedies, and spiritual causes, scrolls that modern scholars still study today. The Ebers Papyrus, for example, is one of the oldest medical texts in the world. It includes hundreds of remedies from soothing ointments to more dung. It's easy to laugh now, But for its time, this was impressive, and people believed in it. They had to. Because when your child is feverish, or your neighbor has boils, or your own belly won't stop cramping, belief is what gets you through the night. Still, it must have been exhausting living in constant negotiation with the gods, the elements your body, and the endless grinding sand. And the scariest part, even if you survive the illness, you're still going to die. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. And in ancient Egypt, that wasn't just the end, that was a whole new beginning. So as you sip your lukewarm beer and try not to think about whether the swelling in your foot is just a bug bite or something far more cursed, you adjust your charm necklace, whisper a prayer, and hope the next life has fewer leeches and better bread. Because when your bandage is a spell and your doctor doubles as a priest, you learn quickly that healing isn't about control. It's about faith. So you've made it through a sun-scorched day, kept your spirit aligned with the gods, and survived whatever ancient bacterial threat tried to take you down last night. You're sore. You're probably still itchy, and your feet feel like 2 loaves of bruised barley bread. But let's talk about something we've only hinted at so far, what it meant to live as a woman in ancient Egypt. You may have heard that Egyptian women had more rights than their counterparts in other ancient civilizations. And that's absolutely true. They could own property, run businesses, sue and be sued, inherit wealth, and even initiate divorce. That's pretty revolutionary considering most women in the ancient world were treated like livestock with a side of dowry. But, and it's a hot, gritty, labor-intensive boo, but legal rights didn't necessarily mean comfort. Because unless you were born into a royal or priestly family, the day-to-day life of a woman in ancient Egypt was a marathon of physical strain, repetitive labor, and barely interrupted chaos. You didn't rise at your leisure. You rose before dawn because the bread didn't grind itself, the water didn't carry itself, and the kids certainly weren't going to stop crying until someone stuck a fig in their mouth and swaddled them with yesterday's linen. Your morning starts with grain. Again, always the grain. You kneel beside a large flat stone, pressing another smaller stone back and forth over handfuls of wheat or barley. It's an ancient version of a treadmill, only the result isn't toned abs. It's worn knees, a crunched spine, and dust in your lungs. You breathe it in, cough it out, and keep going, because if you don't, there's no bread. And if there's no bread, there's no meal, no favor with your husband or mother-in-law, and no peace until someone blames the cat for bringing bad luck into the kitchen. Once the dough is made, it goes into a clay oven, and standing near one of those in the Egyptian heat is like volunteering to be sautéed from the ankles up. The fire roars, the sweat pours, and the children fight in the background over something unimportant and loud. You don't stop. You just tune it out if you're lucky, or yell in their direction if you're not. There's no babysitter, no daycare, no school. You are the all-in-one domestic goddess, and your temple is the kitchen floor. Then comes water, that beautiful muddy frog-filled Nile water. You hoist a clay jar over your shoulder and walk to the river or well dodging donkey's neighbors and 1,000 judgmental stares. Fill the jar, balance it, walk back, spill a drop. That's your shoulder's problem. Your neck stiffens, your hands cramp, your back whispers evil things to you. But the house needs water, so you keep walking. Next comes weaving. Your family's clothes don't just appear magically. Linen doesn't sew itself. You spin thread by hand using a spindle that wobbles like a top on a bad day. You measure fabric without rulers. You stitch tunics by oil lamplight, your fingers raw from threading needles carved from bone. If you're lucky, you get to sit while you work. If not, you're cross-legged on the floor with a toddler pulling at your braid and a goat chewing on the corner of your mat. And don't forget your other responsibilities, tending to animals, sweeping sand from the floor again and again, drying fish, grinding herbs, nursing babies, and helping in the fields during planting or harvest season. In ancient Egypt, if you weren't physically moving, you were probably asleep or dead. Still, there was pride in the work. Women were the backbone of the household economy. And some had jobs outside the home too, especially if they were widowed or unmarried. Women worked as musicians, dancers, perfume makers, even temple priestesses or scribes in rare cases. But these jobs were exceptions, not the rule. Most were tethered to domestic duties, expected to juggle motherhood, food production, and spiritual rituals without ever asking for a break. And let's talk about pregnancy. There's no prenatal yoga here, no warm bath with lavender salts. You gave birth in a room with maybe 2 other women holding you down and chanting incantations to Tauret and Bez, the hippo goddess, and dwarf god responsible for keeping death at bay during labor. That was the goal, don't die. Childbirth was dangerous. No epidurals, no antiseptics, just herbal poultices prayers and an awful lot of bleeding. If the baby survived, it was wrapped in linen anointed with oil and slathered in protective spells. If the mother survived, she went right back to work within days because life didn't stop for new mums. It barely paused. Fashion might seem like a silver lining. Linen dresses were light, simple, and breathable. Makeup, especially kohl eyeliner and red ochre, was worn even by working women. But let's not romanticize too much. That kohl. It was often lead-based. The applicators, tiny sticks that looked suspiciously like sharp cocktail skewers. Your look depended on access time, and whether your children had already smudged soot on your tunic that morning. As for shoes, forget them. Most women went barefoot. Maybe you had a pair of reed sandals for religious festivals or funerals, but the rest of the time, your feet were one stub toe away from becoming a papyrus footnote. And let's not even talk about insect bites, heat rash, or what happened when your tunic got wet with Nile water and stuck to you like a second skin. Still, compared to Greek or Roman women, you had legal muscle. You could appear in court. You could inherit land. Your dowry remained yours even after marriage. And if your husband turned out to be a disaster, you could divorce him. Yes, you would have to go through a bureaucratic nightmare of scrolls and scribes, but it was possible. You were not a man's property. You were a citizen, just a very exhausted one. Historians still debate how much these legal rights translated into actual daily empowerment for most women. Were they just privileges enjoyed by upper-class ladies, or did even peasant women wield some agency? The truth likely falls somewhere in the dusty middle. And royalty. That's a different story altogether. If you were lucky enough to be born into the elite, things changed dramatically. You could read and write. You could manage estates. You could even become a pharaoh like Hatshepsut, who ruled with wisdom and wore a ceremonial beard because, well, optics. Or Cleopatra, who spoke multiple languages, wrote scientific texts, and ran Egypt with a blend of diplomacy, beauty, and sheer will. But those women were anomalies, celestial exceptions, in a world of domestic toil and childbirth risks. For the average Egyptian woman, survival was a full-time job. And while you had rights, those rights didn't wash your clothes or carry your water. Still, you were respected. Your role was central. You weren't invisible. You were the keeper of home faith, children, and food. Your life was physically exhausting, but spiritually grounded. So tonight, as you sit cross-legged outside your hut, fanning your child with a palm leaf while the moon hangs low over the Nile, and the frogs begin their nightly chorus, you don't dream of palaces. You dream of a morning without grain dust, and maybe one nap longer than 7 minutes. So, you've lived, you've labored, and despite the constant risk of sunstroke parasites, divine disapproval, and dental disintegration, you've made it to the end. The end of your day? Nope, the end of your life. Because in ancient Egypt, death isn't the final curtain, it's just intermission. And the show that comes after, it's longer, more complex, and way more bureaucratic than anything you faced while breathing. Let's set the scene. Your body is still. You've drawn your last breath, probably in a small mud brick home, surrounded by family members, neighbors, livestock, and a not insignificant amount of flies. Your relatives grieve, yes, but more importantly, they get to work. Because your death sets off a ritual marathon of cosmic significance and no one wants to mess it up. The consequences aren't just spiritual, they're eternal. First step, preparing your body. If your family is wealthy, they'll call in the embalmers. These aren't just morticians, these are spiritual technicians trained in the sacred science of mummification. You're carted off to a special tent, the place of purification, where your transformation begins. The process not gentle. Your brain is removed through your nose using a hooked instrument that might be the ancestor of medieval torture tools. Your organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines are taken out, washed with palm wine, and stored in canopic jars, each guarded by one of Horus's 4 sons. Your heart, if it's in good shape, is left inside your body. If not, it might be replaced with a stone heart, which is basically the ancient Egyptian version of submitting a forged resume to the gods. Historians still debate whether the removal of the brain was seen as symbolic because Egyptians thought the heart was the center of thought, or just practical because, let's be honest, the brain decomposes fast and smells terrible. Your body is then packed with natron salt loads of it and left to dehydrate for about 40 days. After that, it's washed, oiled, and wrapped in linen bandages. Not a few layers, yet hundreds. Between the layers, your embalmers might tuck in protective amulets, a scarab to ward off evil, an eye of Horus for healing, maybe a tiny golden snake, just in case. Your face might be painted, your hands might be crossed over your chest. If your family can afford it, you'll be placed in a richly painted sarcophagus. If they're really wealthy, maybe even a nested set of coffins like Russian dolls, but for the afterlife. And if you're poor, no mummy, no jars, no sarcophagus. Your body is wrapped in whatever linen your family can spare, sometimes just a shroud, and buried in a shallow pit dug into the desert. You're placed on your side in a fetal position, a pot of beer at your feet, a hunk of bread near your hand, and a prayer whispered into the hot breeze. No murals, no masks, just wind sand and the hope that the gods are listening. Because now comes the real test. Your soul, or ka, awakens in the Tuat, the Egyptian underworld. It's a surreal realm filled with rivers of fire, floating serpents, and gates guarded by gods with names like He Who Swallows the Ignorant. You don't get to stroll through casually, you have to prove yourself. First you face the tribunal of 42 judges. Each one asks you to deny a specific sin, not just the big ones. You have to say, I did not steal, I did not kill, I did not speak ill of the gods, I did not cheat in grain measurements, I did not gossip. It's like the worst legal deposition ever with eternal damnation on the line. Stumble, stutter, forget a line. Too bad. Even one wrong confession can doom your soul. It's like an open book test where the stakes are your spiritual survival and the answer sheet is buried in a tomb 2 cities over. Pass the judges and you move on to the most famous moment in Egyptian mythology, the weighing of the heart. Your heart is placed on a scale. On the other side, the feather of truth, justice, cosmic balance. If your heart is heavier weighed down by guilt, greed, or maybe too many stolen onions, you don't get a second chance. Waiting beside the scale is Ametin Belfakia, the devourer. She's part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, and all nightmare. If your heart tips the scale the wrong way, she eats it. You're erased from existence, not punished, not tortured, just gone. No afterlife, no reunions, no field of reeds. It's spiritual delete. But if your heart balances perfectly, welcome to paradise. You step into the field of reeds. A glorious version of Egypt where the sun is gentle, the Nile flows clean, and the sand doesn't crawl into your ears every time you lie down. Your home is restored, your family is there. There's food, music, fresh linen, and boats, always boats, for traveling, for leisure, for the sheer joy of gliding through eternity on calm, golden waters. You farm without fatigue, you feast without hunger, you sleep without fear. And best of all, you've got helpers. Remember those little statues, Shabtis, tucked into your tomb? They come to life in the afterlife. They work for you. So while the other souls are tending crops, you get to chill in your celestial courtyard sipping beer made of starlight while your figurines dig the irrigation trenches. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? But it's not guaranteed, because everything depends on how well your burial was handled, how accurately your heart behaves, and whether your family could afford the Book of the Dead. A collection of spells, passwords, and ritual instructions meant to guide you through the underworld like a mythological GPS. If you're rich, you get a full copy, lavishly illustrated and filled with chapter after chapter of sacred incantations. If you're poor, you hope the priest remembered the right words. You hope your name was spoken clearly during the funeral. You hope the amulet wasn't placed upside down, because mistakes in burial mean confusion in the afterlife, and confusion leads to delays. And delays mean risk. And in Egypt, risk after death is just as terrifying as risk before it. Still, everyone tries. Even the poorest families scrape together a pot of offerings, a jar of beer, a necklace, a little figurine carved from leftover wood. Because in Egypt, death is not an end, it's a journey. And no one wants their loved one to walk that path alone or unprepared. The fear wasn't dying, it was being forgotten, because to be forgotten is to vanish from eternity. That's why names were carved into tombs, chanted during ceremonies, and painted onto coffins. Your name was your passport to immortality. Lose it and you fade. So tonight, as you lie under the stars, your body aching and your mind racing, you don't just think about tomorrow. You think about forever. You wonder if the offering you left at the temple was enough. You wonder if your son will speak your name when you're gone. You wonder what your heart will weigh to will. Because in ancient Egypt, death isn't final. It's an entrance exam. And you better be ready for the test. Now let's imagine you've done it all right. You worked, worshipped, offered prayers, made your amulets, and passed the cosmic heart exam with flying colors. Maybe your Shaptis are out there planting celestial barley for your eternal lunch while you lounge in the field of reeds. Seems like it's finally time to rest in peace, right? Well, not quite, because in ancient Egypt being dead is one thing. Staying dead secure, undisturbed, and respectfully tucked into your eternal dwelling is something else entirely. You see, your afterlife is not just about your soul making it through the duat. It's also about your physical body, the actual linen-wrapped, natron-dried mummy of you remaining protected and intact, because the ancient Egyptians believed the soul still had a connection to the body. It might travel between realms, yes, but it returned. It visited. It rested in the tomb. So if your tomb is disturbed, if your mummy is damaged, if your name is erased, you're in serious trouble, even in death. That's why Egyptians took tomb building and burial preparation so seriously. Even poor folks tried to get a decent grave. The wealthy, they went all in. And if you were pharaoh-level rich, your tomb wasn't just a fancy hole in the ground. It was a fortress, a house of eternity carved into mountains filled with food, statues, perfumes, weapons, and gold. Not because you were showing off, okay, maybe a little, but because you genuinely believed you'd need all of that in the next life. Unfortunately, there was one problem with this setup. Treasure attracts thieves. And so enter the grim reality of ancient Egypt's most awkward problem. Tomb robbery. It was rampant. Not rare, not occasional. Common. Common enough that entire legal codes were written to punish it. Common enough that some tombs were intentionally hidden in remote valleys sealed with booby traps inscribed with curses like "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted by a serpent made of fire." Did it work? Not really. Tombs were looted anyway. Often. Sometimes within years of being sealed. Sometimes with help from the very workers who built them. That's right. People who carved the sarcophagi, painted the walls, or laid the stone paths would later return by moonlight, pickaxe in hand, and dig up what they just spent a decade burying. And who could blame them? The tombs of pharaohs and nobles were stuffed with valuables. Gold masks, jeweled collars, perfume bottles, bowls made of alabaster, beads carved from lapis lazuli. In a time of famine, a single gold amulet could feed your entire village. So tomb robbing wasn't always greed. Sometimes it was survival. Egypt, for all its glory, went through hard times. There were droughts, invasions, civil wars, political collapses, and in the face of hunger and desperation, even the most sacred resting places weren't safe. Sometimes entire tomb complexes were broken into by organized groups, locals, soldiers, even corrupt priests. Imagine the irony: a holy man offering prayers by day and smashing into burial vaults by night. And when they were caught, the punishments were brutal. Public beatings, amputations, exile, death. But the risk was often worth it. One of the most famous records we have from ancient Egypt is a court document describing a gang of tomb robbers. It details who dug, who carried the loot, who melted it down, and even who took bribes to look the other way. It's practically an ancient true crime special. But it wasn't just pharaohs getting plundered. Even poor people's graves were at risk. Imagine you're a humble farmer. Your family buries you with a little loaf of bread, a jar of beer, maybe a copper ring. It's not much, but it's all they could afford. 2 weeks later, someone digs you up, takes the bread, drinks the beer, and pawns the ring for enough grain to feed their starving children. You can't even be mad, because it's hard to claim moral high ground from beyond the grave when the living are just trying to get through another day. Still, the Egyptians feared grave robbers as much as demons. They knew what desecration meant. It didn't just offend the body, it shattered the soul's connection to eternity. That's why so much effort went into preservation, secrecy, and ritual protection. They carved warnings into tomb walls. They painted watchful eyes on coffins. They buried spells along with the corpse. They wrote the name again and again because name meant identity, and identity meant immortality. If a thief stole your gold, that was bad. But if they broke your statue, if they smashed your canopic jars, if they scraped your name off the wall, that was annihilation. Even the Grand Pyramids of Giza, the most iconic tombs in history, were looted long ago. All that's left are the bones, the dust, and a few lingering whispers of their original glory. The only pharaoh's tomb we know of that made it to modern times, mostly untouched. Tutankhamun. And even that one had been broken into twice in antiquity before being resealed by accident and buried under debris. And when modern archaeologists began uncovering these tombs, they did so with reverence and with curiosity. But let's not pretend the line between archaeologist and grave robber has always been clear. In the 19th century, tombs were opened, artifacts were taken, and mummies were unwrapped at parties. Literally. Victorian elites would host unwrapping nights where ancient Egyptian corpses were slowly peeled like papyrus scrolls, all for spectacle. Talk about a second death. And yet even after centuries of plundering, the belief lingers. The rituals endure. Egyptians built their culture on the idea that life is short, but eternity is long. That what happens after death is worth preparing for. That memory written in stone, sealed in gold, whispered in prayer is what anchors us forever. So tonight, as you lie in your tomb, or your pit, or your borrowed cave, you may wonder, will you be remembered? Will your name survive? Will your bones rest undisturbed? Will your spirit return to your body, find it whole, and step once more into the field of reeds? Or will some desperate hand years from now pry open your coffin, melt down your rings, and leave your soul to wander? Because in ancient Egypt, death is sacred. But grave robbery, that's a tradition too. You face death judgment and the very real possibility of being spiritually devoured by a crocodile-hippo-lion hybrid. You passed the feather test. You made it to the field of reeds. You even managed to keep your tomb intact long enough to start unpacking your tiny army of Shaptis and stretch out on your eternal daybed. But don't get too cozy just yet. Because in ancient Egypt, your immortality isn't just written in stone. It's written in pictures. Specifically in hieroglyphs. You've seen them, the elegant, mysterious carvings on tomb walls, temple columns, scrolls and statues, birds, eyes, snakes, baskets, walking stick figures frozen mid-step like they're in the world's oldest interpretive dance. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs are beautiful, yes, but they're also brain-meltingly complex. Let's start with the basics. The writing system consisted of more than 700 characters. Some symbols represent entire words. Others are sounds kind of like letters. And then there are the determinatives symbols that aren't spoken or read aloud, but are added to clarify meaning. Because why make things simple when you can carve a stalk and a zigzag line just to say river? Oh, and there's no punctuation, no spaces between words, no vowels. And to keep things spicy, hieroglyphs can be written of left to right, right to left, or like top to bottom. The trick to reading them: look at which way the birds or people are facing. If they're looking left, read left. If they're facing right, read right. If they're upside down, well, good luck. Learning hieroglyphs wasn't something you picked up in an afternoon. It took years of study beginning in childhood. Only about 1% of the population could read and write. If you wanted in, you had to become a scribe. And scribes were the elite nerds of ancient Egypt, revered, respected, and crucially indoors. While everyone else was sweating under the sun, hauling bricks and eating sand for breakfast, scribes were tucked into shady chambers with ink papyrus and the sweet smell of black soot and red ochre pigments. They copied tax records, temple scrolls, legal contracts, prayers, letters, love poems, and instructions for dealing with angry spirits. They held society's secrets and its bureaucracy in their perfectly calloused fingers. To the average Egyptian, writing wasn't just communication, it was magic. The very act of writing something down was believed to give it power. A name carved into stone wasn't just identification, it was immortality. A spell inked onto papyrus wasn't just words, it was a tool, an action, a spiritual contract. That's why scribes were trusted with recording births, deaths, property sales, grain counts, and divine laws. And also why, if you made a mistake while copying a religious text, you didn't just cross it out. You begged the gods for forgiveness and started over. But hieroglyphs weren't reserved just for practical purposes. They were used in art, religion, architecture, embedded in every part of Egyptian identity. Tombs were decorated with inscriptions not only to honor the dead, but to equip them. These texts included directions to the afterlife lists of offerings and magical incantations to fend off snakes, scorpions, and angry spirits with terrible social skills. Even statues weren't complete until the name of the individual was carved into the base. Without it, the statue was spiritually inert, a shell, a mannequin with no soul. But add that name, boom, now it's a vessel, a place for your spirit to rest, to visit, to exist. That's why ancient Egyptians feared having their names destroyed more than almost anything else. Erasure wasn't just defacement, it was erasure from the afterlife. If your name was scratched out, you disappeared from eternity. Your soul had nowhere to land. You couldn't return to your tomb, your body, or your beloved field of reeds. So hieroglyphs were serious business. They were carved with purpose, written with precision, painted with reverence. And sometimes when the priests got extra poetic, they were illuminated in gold leaf inlaid with lapis lazuli, or inscribed into precious alabaster tablets. Of course, there were other scripts too, simpler forms of writing like hieratic, and later demotic, used for faster everyday writing on papyrus or pottery shards. These scripts were less elegant, more like cursive shorthand. But hieroglyphs remained the high art, the sacred tongue of the gods and the dead. Now here's a twist: for a long time, nobody could read them. When ancient Egypt finally fell under Greek and then Roman control, the knowledge of how to read hieroglyphs began to vanish. By the time of the Byzantine Empire, the skill was practically extinct. For over 1,000 years, hieroglyphs were an unreadable mystery, a beautiful silent language carved into stone, its meanings locked away. It wasn't until the discovery of the Pursim Rosetta stone in 1799 that the code began to crack. That famous slab had the same inscription written in 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. Thanks to that linguistic triple-decker sandwich, scholars most famously Jean-François Champollion were able to finally decipher the ancient language in the 1820s. Slowly, painfully, the voices of the past were heard again. Think about that. For centuries, the words of an entire civilization, millions of them, were hidden in plain sight. On walls, on coffins, on scrolls, waiting, watching, whispering their meanings into stone, while tourists walked by nodding at bird symbols and pretending they understood what Ankskara beetle owl really meant. And even now it's not easy. Translating hieroglyphs requires years of training, a deep understanding of grammar context and symbolism. There are words for concepts that don't exist anymore, phrases that only make sense in mythological context, and poetry so dense with metaphors and double meanings that you could spend your whole life studying one stela and still have questions. But that's part of the magic, because in ancient Egypt, writing wasn't just a tool, it was a spell, a bridge between the mortal world and the eternal, a weapon against forgetfulness, a voice for the dead. So as you sit in your tomb, whether real or imagined, look around at the walls, the stars painted on the ceiling, the prayers etched above your head, the story of your life carved by steady hands and reverent hearts. You can almost hear it whisper. I existed, I lived, I mattered, and as long as those words remain, you do too. So if you ever find yourself walking through a dusty museum, passing a stone slab covered in symbols, pause for a moment. Tilt your head. Look at which way the birds are facing, because someone 3,000 years ago carved their soul into that wall, one owl, one reed leaf, one scarab at a time. And they're still speaking, waiting to be read, waiting to be remembered. You've made it through the grit and grime of ancient Egypt, deciphered sacred text, and wrestled with your own mortality in a world run by God's ghost and grain. But now the narrative shifts not forward in time, but across an ocean. Because while you've been busy surviving under the sun-drenched sky of the Nile Valley, a very different kind of temple was rising thousands of miles away. It wasn't a place of prayer exactly, not a quiet sanctuary or a holy sanctuary lined with lotus flowers and bird-headed gods. No, this temple had snarling stone serpents carved into its walls. It was a place where geometry met fear. Welcome to Testetu Teotihuacan, home of the Atrutan Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Let's change the setting. You're no longer wading through Nile silt with a jar on your head. You're standing in the highlands of central Mexico centuries before the Aztecs. The air is cooler, the landscape dry, the mountains are jagged like the broken teeth of sleeping giants, and before you a city so vast, so symmetrical, so strange that historians still argue about who built it and why. Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born, was once the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. At its peak, around 100 to 250 CE, it had over 100,000 residents, rivaling ancient Rome and Chang'an in scale. Its wide boulevards, grid-like streets, and towering pyramids made it a cosmic city, a planned metropolis where religion, astronomy, politics, and power were fused into stone. At the center of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. This temple was unsettling. Unlike the serene grandeur of Egyptian monuments, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent doesn't welcome you, it confronts you. Its facade is lined with rows of stone serpent heads, their jaws open in a permanent snarl, their eyes wide, unblinking, terrifying. They don't whisper, they warn. This is not a place for casual visitors, it's a place of blood. Historians still debate the exact religious role of Quetzalcoatl at this early stage. Later, the Aztecs would view him as a gentle, civilizing god, the bringer of knowledge, wind, and maize. But here in Teotihuacan, he was something else, something darker, because this temple wasn't just for worship, it was for sacrifice. Excavations beneath the structure have revealed mass graves, and by mass we mean over 200 human bodies, mostly young men, mostly warriors, many decapitated, some with their hands tied behind their backs, some buried with obsidian knives, others with jewelry made from human jawbones. These weren't haphazard burials. They were arranged with chilling precision, laid out in their symbolic patterns, perhaps aligned with the 4 cardinal directions or with celestial paths. These men were not criminals. They weren't buried in shame. They were offerings. Their deaths weren't about punishment. They were about power. Cosmic power, political power, the kind that says this temple stands because you no longer do. It's hard to overstate the importance of sacrifice in Mesoamerican belief systems. Blood was fuel. It nourished the gods. It balanced the cosmos. And this temple, it was an engine designed to channel that fuel to convert life into divine order. But the real mystery isn't just the sacrifice. It's the builders. No one knows exactly who created Teotihuacan. There are no royal names carved into the stone, no kingly faces immortalized in murals. The city seems to have been run by a collective or maybe a priestly class. There are no inscriptions saying, I, Pharaoh Bob, built this. There are only symbols, murals, and artifacts, hints of a civilization that somehow vanished without writing its name in history's book. And yet its influence was vast. Artifacts from Teotihuacan have been found as far as the Maya city of Tikal and Copan, and the Zapotec capital of Monte Alban, Damde, pottery, obsidian, even diplomatic meddling. Some scholars believe emissaries from Teotihuacan helped perpetrate overthrow Maya rulers and install new kings loyal to the feathered serpent ideology. This wasn't just a city, it was an empire of shadows. Its structures were aligned with astronomical events. The Avenue of the Dead runs 15 degrees off true north, possibly aligned with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or with Venus' sacred planet of war, sacrifice, and rebirth. And underneath it all, more darkness. In the 2000s, archaeologists discovered a sealed tunnel beneath the temple deliberately filled in 1,800 years ago. Inside, liquid mercury. Pyrite-covered walls that shimmered like starlight, pools of reflective minerals, figurines, jade, obsidian, rubber bowls, carved wooden masks. It wasn't a tomb, it wasn't even a basement. It was a cosmic mirror, a symbolic underworld meant to imitate the Milky Way. To walk through it was to journey through death and rebirth. Some believe it was used in initiation rituals, a place where new rulers descended into the dark to emerge transformed, bathed in starlight, ready to rule. And remember, all of this was buried under layers of volcanic ash dust and time. The Spanish never found Teotihuacan. The Aztecs stumbled on it centuries later and believed it had been built by gods. They treated it as a sacred ruin, a holy place they didn't dare claim as their own. To this day, no one knows why Teotihuacan fell. Around 550 CE, the elite compounds were burned, the temples smashed, the murals defaced. The temple of the feathered serpent, once a theater of divine power, was desecrated, but not by an enemy. From within, a rebellion perhaps, a civil collapse, a refusal to keep feeding the gods. And then, silence. The city was abandoned. The snake heads crumbled, the cosmic tunnels sealed, the voices quieted. But not forever. Because today, tourists walk past those same serpent heads. Children play in the plazas. Scholars brush dust off carved jawbones and wonder what it all meant. The serpent stares back silent, watchful, coiled not in aggression, but in memory. It's not just a ruin. It's a reminder that civilizations rise, that they sacrifice, that they vanish, and that long after the fires burn out, the stone still speaks. So, whether you're under the Egyptian sun or the Mexican highlands, one truth remains. The gods always demanded more than worship. They demanded blood. So now you're standing at the base of the temple of the feathered serpent heart, pounding beneath an open sky that once blazed with divine fury and festival firelight. You've heard the stories about the obsidian knives, the tunnels lined with shimmering minerals, the walls that whisper of blood rebirth and celestial ambition. But the temple isn't just a graveyard of forgotten rituals. It's a cosmic machine. Let's back up for a second. You see, Teotihuacan wasn't thrown together haphazardly. This wasn't an ancient build-it-as-you-go kind of city. It was planned meticulously. The layout reflects a deep understanding of both the earthly and the celestial. The city's main thoroughfare, the Avenue of the Dead, doesn't even run perfectly north-south. It's offset by exactly 15.5 degrees. From true north, which scholars believe aligns with the setting of the Pleiades. or other significant celestial bodies during sacred times of the year. Every angle mattered, every alignment had a purpose. And right at the center of this grand cosmic coordinate system sits the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, not by coincidence, but by design. This temple wasn't just a stage for sacrifice, it was the anchor point in a city meant to mirror the heavens. The layout of Teotihuacan's three great pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent may correspond with the movement of the sun, the cycles of Venus, and even specific solar or lunar events. Historians still debate whether these alignments were designed to mark solstices, equinoxes, or ritual festivals tied to agriculture, war, or prophecy. But there's one thing everyone agrees on: they didn't build these structures just to look nice. They built them to function as calendars, clocks, and bridges between the earth and the cosmos. And the temple that was the Kinjin, let's return to that tunnel. Beneath the Feathered Serpent's temple lies a hidden world, a subterranean chamber painstakingly sealed by the ancient Teotihuacanos over 1,800 years ago. Archaeologists only rediscovered it in the 2000s, using ground-penetrating radar and robot crawlers. What they found was astonishing. This wasn't a random passage, it was intentional, symmetrical, and steeped in symbolism. The walls were once covered with powdered pyrite fool's gold, which sparkled like starlight in torchlight. There were pools of liquid mercury that may have represented the underworld rivers or the fluid veil between life and death. This place wasn't just underground. It was otherworldly, and it wasn't just decoration. The very architecture seemed to serve a spiritual purpose. Walking through this tunnel might have felt like stepping into the night sky, a pilgrimage into the belly of the universe, a ceremonial death before emerging, reborn, into the divine light above. And who walked it? Rulers, priests, initiates in mystery cults, all of the above. No one knows for sure, but we do know. The tunnel contained over 100,000 ritual objects, figurines of gods, rubber balls used in sacred ball games, obsidian blades never used in battle, only in ceremony, jade masks, shells from far-off coasts, offerings not meant for mortals, but for the cosmos. It's likely that the very construction of the temple was tied to these rituals. In Mesoamerican tradition, building a sacred space often involved consecrating it with human life. Not metaphorically, literally. Lives were given to power the stones, to charge the walls with spirit, to turn architecture into divine reality. And that might be why so many bodies lie beneath the temple, not tossed, not dumped, placed, arranged, aligned. Death wasn't the end, it was an activation. The logic here isn't cruelty, it's cosmic reciprocity. The gods sacrificed themselves to bring life to the world. Humans returned the favor to keep it spinning. It's a grim beauty that in death you became part of something eternal, that your blood watered the gears of a temple designed not just to impress, but to speak to the stars. And this brings us to the deity himself, the Feathered Serpent, or as the Aztecs later called him, Quetzalcoatl, part bird, part snake. A creature that defied categories. Birds soar, snakes slither. One belongs to the sky, the other to the earth. To combine them is to create a paradox, a god of opposites, of wind and earth, of creation and destruction, of life and death. And here's where it gets even weirder. In some Mesoamerican myths, the Feathered Serpent descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of previous humans. He ground them up, added his own blood, and from that mixture humankind was born. In other words, your very existence is made from the ingredients of death and sacrifice. So when a young warrior is buried beneath this temple, it's not murder, it's a mirroring. An echo of the god's own sacrifice. A blood gift in exchange for cosmic favor. It's terrifying. It's logical. It's profoundly human. The temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a place of death. It was a place of transition. From life to death. From human to divine. From this world to the next. It's a portal made of stone, blood, and breath. And the people who built it, they weren't just engineers. They were the philosophers of flesh and flame. When you stand before the temple today with tourists milling about and vendors selling replicas of stone heads, it's easy to forget what lies beneath. But the bones are still there. The serpents still watch. The tunnel still waits, sealed but restless. Because the city of Teotihuacan may have fallen its name, forgotten its builders, lost to time. But this temple remembers. It remembers the songs sung as bodies were lowered into the ground. It remembers the gleam of obsidian under a full moon. It remembers the moment the cosmos cracked open and something divine came crawling out, feathers, ruffled fangs gleaming, demanding a heart in return for the stars. And as the sun sets behind the jagged skyline of this ancient city, a quiet hum lingers in the dry wind. Not of footsteps, not of chants, but of alignment, of ritual, of balance paid in blood. Because in Teotihuacan, as in Egypt, the temples weren't just monuments. They were contracts. And those contracts are still binding. By now, you understand that ancient temples weren't passive structures. They were instruments of fear, faith, and fate. And nowhere was this more vividly demonstrated than in the spectacle that unfolded in the shadow of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Because Teotihuacan didn't just build their city in cosmic alignment. They performed the other bit. Imagine walking into the central plaza of the temple, Kuvenfon, 800 years ago, not as a modern tourist with a sun hat and a guidebook, but as a foreign emissary, a visiting ruler, or perhaps just a humble trader who happened to arrive on the wrong day. The first thing you notice isn't the size, it's the feeling. It's in the air. The silence of anticipation, thick and ceremonial. Then the sound begins. Drums, rattles, conch shells. The ground beneath your feet pulses with rhythm. Dust swirls in deliberate gusts as figures emerge from behind columns wearing enormous feathered headdresses and cloaks that shimmer with obsidian beads. They move in synchrony, slow at first, then spiraling faster, chanting words you don't understand but feel anyway in your ribs, your spine, your animal brain. You're in the audience, but this isn't a show. It's a warning. At the top of the temple, priests in blackened masks raise their hands to the sky. Below them, a bound figure is led forward, calm, resolute, dressed not in rags but in regalia. A warrior, a volunteer maybe, or maybe someone chosen. Either way, there is no struggle. He kneels. The priest draws an obsidian blade, its edge sharper than surgical steel, glinting like frozen starlight. And then, a flash, a motion too fast for your breath to keep up. The offering is made, the heart lifted to the sky, blood streaming down the stone steps like a crimson tribute to the gods who made this world possible and who might unmake it without notice. This wasn't chaos, it was Han orchestration. Public sacrifice was not a rare occurrence in Teotihuacan. It was ritual theater, choreographed for maximum impact. The ceremony reinforced a divine truth: the rulers of the city had the favor of the gods, and they had the power and the courage to feed those gods in front of everyone. Imagine what that does to a crowd. You're a visiting noble from a smaller city-state. You've never seen a structure this vast, this aligned to the stars. You've never heard such precision in ritual drums, seen such symmetry in slaughter. You walk away from that plaza deeply shaken. And when Teotihuacan suggests a trade